Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. Enormous pressure is building on Bernie Sanders to unify the party, declare his support for Hillary Clinton, because according to the Clinton campaign and most mainstream television networks, the numbers are kind of in, or will be Tuesday night. And by the end of Tuesday night, Sanders, instead of making a speech calling for a fight at the convention, should make a speech about unifying the party to fight Donald Trump. Now, joining us to discuss and debate this whole question, first of all, from Woodstock, New York, is Jeff Cohen. Jeff is a media critic. Jeff's on the right side of the screen, by the way. Jeff is a media critic and lecturer. He's a founding director at the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he's an associate professor of journalism. His latest book is Cable News Confidential, My Misadventures in Corporate Media, and Jeff's the co-founder of RootsAction.org, an online activist organization. And on your left, joining us from Concord, New Hampshire, is Paul Hodes. Hodes is a former U.S. representative for New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District and an attorney. He's also a talk show host on WKXL and CEO of several media firms. Thank you both for joining us.
Nice to be with you.
So just to shorten things up, Paul is a supporter of Secretary Clinton. Jeff is a supporter of Senator Sanders. Paul, I'm going to start with you. Make the argument why you think Sanders should essentially end things if he doesn't have a massive breakthrough in California, although even if he does have a massive breakthrough in California, some people are arguing if Hillary Clinton keeps all the current pledged delegates and gets New Jersey, she'll be over, although not, it doesn't mean people can't change their mind. Anyway, what's the argument?
We face a far greater enemy in Donald Trump than Bernie and Hillary do in each other. Those who care about progressive values, those who care about economic opportunity and justice need to come together and fight a common foe sooner rather than later.
Jeff?
Well, I agree that Trump is the greater enemy by far. I guess I feel that the unity is in the hands, unifying the party. It's not what Bernie does. It's what Hillary Clinton does. And Bernie's got every right to take his campaign to the convention because neither Hillary Clinton nor Bernie Sanders will have a majority of the pledged delegates. And, the super delegates are not allowed to vote until the convention begins. So I believe it's all in Hillary Clinton's hands. I think she's got to take it seriously that half of the Democratic Party's base is quite progressive. And, she's got a bunch of decisions to make, like who's going to be her vice presidential running mate. And, if she makes the right decisions, I think they could unify the party. But I have grave doubts about what the Clinton team is going to do.
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, look, after New Jersey and California, let's even assume that Bernie wins California. The math tells us that Hillary Clinton is going to be ahead both in delegates as well as superdelegates. So Bernie's argument that she's not ahead in the popular vote after, by the way, has spent months trashing the superdelegates, his argument that she's not ahead will be gone at the end of tomorrow. So whether in terms of the popular vote in the primaries and caucuses, whether in delegate count, whether in superdelegate count, that's all stacked up against Bernie. So I agree that Bernie probably has maximum leverage tomorrow night in terms of cutting whatever deal he wants to cut with Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. He ought to use that leverage and then unify the party so that he will continue to have a voice in the platform, continue to have the kind of voice that he ought to be talking to Secretary Clinton about. If he continues to press on with a pretty hopeless fight to the convention, and we end up with a mess at the convention, all it does is strengthen the impossible, which is the concept of a Trump presidency. By uniting now and working together to unite the progressive wings and the centrist wings of the party, which absolutely need to be done. The establishment centrist wing of this party needs to pay attention to what has happened in this primary in a very, very significant way. And we could go on and on about the faults of the centrist establishment. But given that, they need to work together. So I wouldn't put it on anybody's individual shoulders. I was at Unity, New Hampshire in 2008 as a major surrogate for Barack Obama when Hillary and Barack came together. I think that that would do a great service to the entire left, both progressives and centrists. And I think that it's up to Bernie to reach out.
Yeah, I guess I don't see it that way. I mean, let's go back to 2008, as Paul just did. In 2008, Hillary Clinton campaigned in all of the primaries to the very end. There is a primary 8 days from today in Washington, D.C. So the idea that Bernie should do something tomorrow night, I think sort of, he's got a campaign going on in Washington, D.C. as well, which is the final vote. I do not want to mess at the Philadelphia convention, but I want Bernie's message and the progressive message, which is at least, it's half of the Democratic Party base. I want it to be heard. I think the initiative needs to come from the Clinton camp. And this idea, both the mainstream media and the Clinton camp and the Democratic Party establishment, they've been trying to get Bernie to stop running for a while now. And all it's doing is irritating the very committed Bernie supporters. So if I were advising the Clinton team, and I'm certainly not, I would tell them, lay off, relax, let the process happen, and do reach out to Bernie Sanders. You got weeks and weeks to do it before the convention in Philadelphia. And I think for speaking as one Bernie supporter, I don't really care that much about the platform, but I do acknowledge that this is the most progressive platform drafting committee of any major party, perhaps in U.S. history. So that's a good thing. But most of the Bernie supporters don't care about the platform. What the Bernie supporters care about, and by the way, we are the ascending wing in the Democratic Party because we've got so many young people in our camp, unlike the Democratic establishment camp. But what I think people want to hear about that are going to the convention as delegates or activists, and they're progressive and they're for Bernie, they want to hear who's going to be the vice president, who are going to be some of the cabinet people. I think that's the conversation, and it's okay by me if that's done very, very quietly between Bernie and his leadership and Hillary and her leadership. But, the most important single decision that Hillary Clinton can make is choosing a progressive vice presidential running mate. That would be the best way to unify the party.
What do you think of that, Paul?
Well, I certainly think that the names that I've heard for potential vice presidential picks, Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren, Castro, are all interesting choices and generally considered to be progressive. And I think we can put aside the procedural issue or the process issue of whether Bernie reaches out to Hillary or Hillary reaches out to Bernie. What I think will happen after tomorrow is that much of the media, whether it's progressive media or establishment media, will acknowledge that Hillary Clinton is the presumptive nominee. She will turn her attention full throttle to Trump in the way that we saw recently with her foreign policy speech. And it may be that Bernie continues to press on. I think that his argument and his impact lessens for him the more and the further he presses on. And the idea that he has espoused that the superdelegates will somehow flip to him after tomorrow, even with a California win, is just it's not what's going to happen.
I would say that I think it's a mistake for Clinton supporters to tell Bernie supporters and Bernie himself that he's got to do something tomorrow. The election is not over tomorrow. The election, there is an election even a week later in Washington, D.C. There's a strong Bernie campaign in D.C. and a strong Hillary Clinton campaign. To me, the media bias, and the corporate media was never comfortable with Bernie Sanders. He puts forward policy positions that up until he was running for president and getting these huge crowds, the corporate mainstream media never entertained those policy positions. They're not comfortable with Bernie Sanders' policy positions or the millions of people that support Bernie Sanders. So the more that the corporate mainstream media says that the superdelegates have already decided, that's what's so irritating. I agree with you, Paul, that it's likely that the superdelegates are going to stick with Hillary. They are the Democratic establishment. 350 of them or more had announced their support for Hillary Clinton before a single vote was cast by the masses in Iowa or New Hampshire. So, I mean, that aspect of it is so anti-democratic and so irritating to Bernie Sanders' movement and campaign that, and the other thing the one good thing for me as a media critic is that millions of young people have seen that you cannot trust the corporate media. They've been trying, at first with Bernie Sanders, it was ignore him, and then it was ridicule him, and then it was attack him. But what's really been irritating, not just from the Clinton camp, but from the mainstream media, is Bernie should get out of the race. Bernie should get out of the race. It doesn't make sense. There's an election in California and 5 other places on Tuesday, tomorrow, and in D.C. And then there's weeks for the two camps to negotiate. And
so,
again,
Jeff, here's what I'm thinking about. Believe me, I understand the passion of Bernie supporters. I feel it every day on Facebook. In no uncertain terms, I have been reviled up and down the whipping post by my friends on Facebook. So I get the passion. After tomorrow, if I'm right, and that it really is mathematically impossible, and the reality is that Bernie is not going to be the nominee because he can't flip the superdelegates, and the math is in, then his pursuing his crusade to other primary election states when essentially it's all over.
Hang on for a sec, Paul. Jeff's point was that at the convention, there's going to be clearly 2 big camps, and it's not just about these 2 candidates. It's 2 big camps of people who are on the left of the Democratic Party and people who are on the center and also on the corporate side of the Democratic Party, which Sanders clearly accused of Hillary of being part of, and I think it's hard to argue against that. But Jeff is making a very specific proposal that if she doesn't acknowledge that there is this left progressive wing of the party that's a significant player, and by concretely, who's the vice president, who are the members of the cabinet? Like, for example, Sanders challenged her not to have a Wall Street team running the Treasury Department. Is she going to concede on something like that? And if he doesn't go to that convention right to the bitter end, if you will, willing to fight on those kinds of questions, then why would she, except for one thing, and this adds to the same picture. A lot of Sanders supporters, maybe as many as a third or more, have said they're not going to vote for her. I mean, how is she going to capture that young, enthusiastic voter base, many of whom don't want to vote for her under any conditions, if she doesn't make some serious concessions?
So listen, concessions, I don't think that talking about concessions is the productive issue. If Bernie cares about his agenda, if he cares about his people, if he cares about the country, why isn't it a much better course, a more statesmanlike course, a more leveraged course, and a more powerful course to engage her now that essentially, let's assume that he's lost after Tuesday, to engage her in that discussion between now and then reaching out to his people although he said he doesn't control them. Obviously, they care what he says. Reaching out to them to make the points you've just made, and begin the discussion with her. That's what he ought to do.
Well, I would tend to agree with a lot of what you just said, except I don't understand why that discussion should not wait until after the people have voted in the western states tomorrow, and then in Washington, D.C. and New Jersey tomorrow, and then Washington, D.C. the week after. The negotiations should begin after all of the voting is done. Hillary Clinton campaigned in all of the primaries 8 years ago. She didn't concede before the last primary. Well, the last primary is 8 days away. But in terms of the key issue, the most important issue, I think, to Bernie supporters is who are going to be these people in the Hillary Clinton cabinet and on her team if she wins in November. And beginning with the vice president, Elizabeth Warren would be quite acceptable, I think, to even the most diehard young Bernie supporters. Sherrod Brown, it would have to be explained that he's worked arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder with Bernie Sanders fighting these horrible corporate-friendly trade deals. But if she nominates someone like Castro, who's got the same sort of corporate centrist orientation as Hillary Clinton, I consider that it would be Hillary Clinton's way of conceding, so that she's not going to win in November. My point is that most of the decision-making clout...
Hold on, Jeff. What does that mean, conceding she's not going to win in November?
If she chooses a corporate Democrat running mate that's similar to her corporate centrist politics, I don't think you're going to bring home a lot of these Bernie Sanders voters. It would be the quickest. It would be like Gore choosing Lieberman. It was insane. And
listen, I couldn't disagree with you more. I think that when the general election issues are truly joined, whoever is Hillary's vice president, whoever she's talked about for her cabinet, whoever those people are, any thinking voter, any voter who cares about progressive values will frankly swallow it and vote for Hillary as opposed to Trump. I just that's the reality of the way things are going to happen. But that all of that aside, whether or not if you say that there's 8 days between now and the other primaries, the conversation should start as soon as possible between Bernie and Hillary. That conversation ought to start right now, whether he goes through his other primaries in Washington, wherever they are, that's fine, but the conversation ought to start. And I think he has maximum leverage now.
Right.
He
will not be in any stronger position.
Jeff, what do you make of the argument? It doesn't matter who the cabinet and vice president are. Anyone left of center has to vote for Clinton.
Again, I think you're whistling past the graveyard. We went through this in 2000. When Gore did not beat Bush by enough, so that Bush could not steal the election. That was largely.
But look, here's something you're not thinking about, Jeff. Look at it this way: from what you're seeing from the Republicans and the revulsion for Trump, you're going to have a significant portion of the Republican Party crossing over or wanting to cross over to the Democratic Party. If you look at who's the better candidate from that point of view, they're more inclined to cross over for Hillary than they are for Bernie, because by your estimation, she's less progressive or more centrist. That's a more likelier inducement for independents leaning towards Republican than Bernie would be.
No, Paul, what you just said is negated by all of the polls. If you look into the internals of these polls, and MSNBC's pollsters just wrote an article, I think it was yesterday, that independents and even and Republicans are more likely to cross over and vote for Bernie than Hillary. But putting that aside, we've been down this path before. It really matters that Hillary Clinton recognized that half of the Democratic Party base is very, very progressive.
What makes you think she hasn't?
But see, you Paul, no. You just talked about on Facebook how you're being pilloried for your support of Hillary. The passion is there, and in my view, we know what Bernie's going to do. Bernie has said since about 1984, when it was Mondale versus Reagan, that people should, be serious about the right-wing threat and not allow the right wing to beat even a moderate or corporate Democrat. He said that every 4 years. So we know what Bernie's going to do and say. The issue is, and Bernie's going to encourage people in swing states and, that she's much better than Trump, assuming Hillary becomes the nominee. So to me, it's obvious that the person who's got the important decisions to make is not Bernie, it's Hillary Clinton. And if she chooses an Elizabeth Warren or a Sherrod Brown, and she assures Bernie, look, this is the kind of person who's going to be the Secretary of Labor, and no, we aren't going to let the Rubins and the corporate Wall Street Democrats run the economy like they have in past Democratic administrations, well, then you really have grounds for unity where you won't lose millions of Democratic Bernie voters. And so I believe that, it's Hillary that's holding the cards, and that Hillary's the one who needs to really, after the DC primary in 8 days, she's the one who's got to start talking. Look,
Paul, I've interviewed a lot of Sanders supporters, and I would say the majority of people I've interviewed do not consider Hillary Clinton a progressive. Both in terms of foreign policy, she's been often allied with neocons from Iraq to Libya and Syria, Afghanistan. In domestic policy, she's, her ties to Wall Street and such. I'm not trying to get into the argument of the substance of that with you right now, but a large number, at least a third of Sanders supporters have already said they won't support Hillary. And many do not consider this a difference between the amount of progressivism. They don't consider Hillary progressive, period. They see her as a representative of a section of the elite, or the billionaire class, as Sanders calls it. Doesn't she, I'm kind of picking up on Jeff's point, does she not have to send some really serious signal to keep those people? There's a lot of people I've talked to that actually find Trump's foreign policy, although no one can quite believe it, frankly, more progressive than Hillary's.
Look, he's picked up important endorsements from Kim Jong-il of North Korea. So you know that he's got important foreign policy cred. That's not an argument to get into. I think that
I'm not trying to get into the argument of the substance of it. I'm saying there's a large number of Sanders supporters that do not consider her on foreign and domestic policy as a progressive.
Okay, I get that. So I hear you. Assume you're right. Whatever they consider her, if right now a third of Bernie Sanders supporters are saying they're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton, then on whose shoulders does bringing them home to the left fall? Is it Bernie's shoulders because he's incited their passions, or is it Hillary, whom they said they don't support? I don't see that whatever Hillary does under the scenario that you proposed does anything to bring those folks home. The only person who can do something about it, or the chief person who can, is Bernie Sanders. And so the question about what Bernie Sanders will do, when he does it, how he does it, in what style he does it, and how he takes advantage of the remarkable campaign he has run, I think is going to be up to Bernie. So I think all he says is, I'm going to the convention.
All right, we're running out of time. Quick final word, Jeff.
Yeah, I think you've got it upside down. We know what Bernie's going to do. He's going to say we're going to fight on for progressive values for the coming months and years. And Hillary is if she's the nominee, is far preferable to Trump. And she's going to say it over and over and over. It's in Hillary's camp, Hillary's court, Hillary's side on if she chooses Elizabeth Warren, then I believe the Democrats march into the White House. If she chooses a corporate Democrat as her vice president and makes other bad decisions, they may very well lose. It's not up to Bernie Sanders. He's waged his campaign. He's going to say that any Democrat, including Hillary, is far preferable to Trump. But it's up to Hillary to win or lose this election, not Bernie.
Okay, thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.